A massive document leak from Chinese company An洵, a cybersecurity firm that hacks on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, offers a rare window into the CCP's global surveillance and hacking regime. Among the documents leaked are internal documents like contracts, marketing presentations, and client and employee lists, but more significantly, documents revealing the methods used to surveil dissidents, hack foreign nations, and manipulate social media abroad. The leak shows evidence of the firm hacking the governments of China's neighbors, including Vietnam and Taiwan, among others, as well as evidence of email inboxes and social media accounts in the West. No evidence of successful cyber attacks against NATO or the U.S. have been discovered thus far. We know the CCP has been doing things like this, but here we have a smoking gun. What are your initial thoughts on this leak?
We have discovered so many smoking guns in the past, but this is the first time there is a massive amount of evidence connecting the Chinese intelligence and security agencies with what obviously is viewed by the West as a private company. So that's why this is a very, very sensitive topic, because there has been lingering illusion that somehow we could still engage with the company in China that's a private company, and therefore the only thing remaining is de-risking. This is a very devastating blow to that illusion, because, first of all, there is no such thing as a Chinese private company, period, full stop. If you are doing business with the entity owned or controlled by the Chinese government, you are doing business with the CCP. Not only do the Chinese national security laws spell this out very clearly, but so does common sense. Secondly, this is the case because there's no such thing as a property rights in China. You can make some money, but you don't really have the total ownership of government can come over and take it over anytime they want. So it's bad enough that Chinese companies are controlled by the CCP, but to have American companies controlled by China isn't just that's just outright dangerous. That's a fact. That's because all Chinese companies and all foreign companies working inside China must comply with Chinese security laws. Basically, there are three intelligence and security laws in China. Number one is the National Intelligence Law. Number two is the Chinese National Security Law. And number three is the Chinese counter-espionage laws that has just been updated last year, which caused quite a big stir, which is also one of the major reasons that trigger the massive exodus of foreign companies, particularly American companies, because every foreign company will be treated by default as suspicious of being a foreign agent. According to all these Chinese security and intelligence laws, all companies, including U.S. companies, must cooperate with the Chinese intelligence and security services. It might be that they don't enforce them every day, but any firm connected to China is vulnerable. So you can see the nature of the engagement with China is really about a clash of completely different political and economic systems. We have to really understand China's basic framework as it's not a market economy. It is a communist country, and it does want to dominate the globe economically, technologically, and sooner or later, politically, militarily as well, according to their own statements. It's not that we don't understand this. I think we know this in the West for a long, long time, but there has not been sufficiently incorporated into this understanding into our China policy, using words like competition or coexistence to define the bilateral relationship between Western countries and China. From this point of view, I think what this case illustrated is that de-risking is just a dream, because de-risking assumes we can continue to do business with China, but then the matter is just for us to get rid of the risk. It's a naive dream. Decoupling is probably the only way to go forward. Unless China changes its non-market and command economic nature, and its intelligence, security, and espionage laws, do not do business with China. not even compete with them because there are no rules for them to abide by in a fair and transparent contest. And I think the West will lose if we continue to fantasize China as a part of the global free market system based on limited government, popular sovereignty, and a constitutional protection of private property. So from this point of view also, my view is that the policy of de-risking, it's a risk itself.
That's well said. I want to ask just a follow-up. In the CCP's official response, they accused the United States of having long worked to compromise China's critical infrastructure and demanded that the U.S., quote, stop using cybersecurity issues to smear other countries. Now, obviously any prudent nation has cybersecurity capabilities in today's conflict environment. In light of specifically how they're targeting dissidents and things like that abroad, what would you say makes the U.S.'s approach different to that of the CCP's approach in light of this document leak?
If you look at the American intelligence organizations, particularly since the 1970s, there have been a dramatic increase of its the policy guidance. In other words, intelligence agencies were subject to civilian control, subject to elected officials' supervision. So Congress and the executive branch, you have different layers of enforcement of those laws. And so except for its operational security, and you can basically find out a lot of information about the intelligence operations, particularly its policy. So these were guided by law. It's not without any guidance at all. The Chinese system, however, is very different. All organizations inside China must satisfy the insatiable appetites for the Chinese central government to control, to spy. The Chinese government has this most sophisticated, most comprehensive, most advanced technologically surveillance system over its own people. One foreign poor Chinese, nobody can escape from that. You can see this massive amount of digital control of every citizen's behavior. And that's basically a very, very dangerous thing. I think we have to realize the danger and the pervasiveness of the Chinese government operation in this area particularly.
A confrontation over a Chinese illegal fishing operation in Taiwan's territorial waters between the Taiwan Coast Guard and Chinese fishermen ended in the deaths of 2 Chinese nationals. The Taiwan Coast Guard pursued the boat, which capsized during the chase, throwing its crew of 4 into the water, with 2 of them drowning. The PRC condemned Taiwan's behavior, stating it, quote, severely harmed the feelings of compatriots on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Miles, we've talked about events like this in the past as potential flashpoints, which could escalate tensions. What are your reflections on this and its potential for escalation?
Okay, so this is a very small incident in a larger scheme of things. However, I'm actually surprised Western media have not picked it up because this tiny incident involves something that's very, very serious. 2 aspects mostly. Mostly, one, it offers a window to China's massive IUU violations. IUU means illegal, unrestricted, and unregulated fishing. China is the world's #1 offender globally. Is ignore other nations' laws and regulations. When confronted, China's standard response is that China condemns this rude law enforcement, or the most obvious one is Chinese fishermen's traditional fishing areas are there. So therefore, they use traditional fishing practice in history as the excuse, explicitly denying the legality of local government's laws and regulations and environment protection measures. This is China's illegal fishing. It's far beyond the Pacific. It's in Atlantic. It's also in the Indian Ocean. So it's become a global issue. But far more importantly, this tiny incident about drowning of 2 Chinese alleged fishermen, many speculate that they're actually Chinese soldiers in disguise, involved this tiny island of Quemoy. And this is very important because Quemoy has been the most sensitive island in Asia. It's most likely that the first shot of World War III will be fired at Quemoy due to its unique geographic location and its illustrious history in the Cold War. Two of the four Taiwan Strait crises, 1954, 1958, involves Quemoy. And the invasion of Taiwan by the CCP must start with the invasion of Quemoy. Let me explain why. Quemoy occupied a crucial role in the U.S.-China relationship, for that matter, global geostrategy. If you understand Chinese history and American history, you will know that in 1960, there was a famous presidential debate series, three of them, between Richard Nixon and John Kennedy. The first televised TV debates that sort of captivated the nation's attention. The number one foreign policy issue in the last debate was about the Quemoy-Machu crisis. China started bombing the Quemoy Island on August 23rd, 1958. And that bombing didn't stop in 1960 presidential election, and also did not stop for the next 21 years. So this is a really important case. Due to its extreme proximity to China, which is about 6 miles away, the other side of Quemoy is Taiwan Island, about 95 miles away. The United States policy, however, has consistently held that Quemoy and other offshore islands held by Taiwan, but much closer to PRC coastlines, are not defensible. Therefore, those islands have never been within America's defense perimeter, not even covered by the 1954-55 Mutual Defense Treaty between U.S. and Taiwan, not even covered by the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, which is a cornerstone of America's defense pledge for Taiwan today. Because of these long-held views, the U.S. government tried to persuade the ROC government, Taiwan government, to basically, be realistic. Those islands, offshore islands, were indefensible. But we have failed to persuade the ROC government under Chiang Kai-shek to abandon those islands to focus on the defense of Taiwan and Penghu Islands themselves. But the ROC government has consistently insisted that the defense of Quemoy and other offshore islands are an integral part of the homeland defense. They are inseparable from Taiwan Island itself. So you see, there is a policy ambiguity right there. For the CCP, however, it's a dilemma. In Chinese, it's a way to describe the dilemma called the 饥乐,食之无味,弃之可惜. Translated into English is like Quemoy Island is like a chicken rib, too bland, insipid, and tasteless to eat. Yet it will be a pity to throw it away. On one hand, it is an enemy's territory so close to China, so easy to take for the CCP. But precisely because they're so close to the PRC, they serve as an indispensable tie to China. So the last 7 decades, the CCP always took advantage of Americans' exclusion of these offshore islands from America's Taiwan defense perimeter, constantly creating crises over these islands, like the 1954-1958 crisis, but never actually attempted to invade and take over those islands for fear of losing those last ties of Taiwan with China. So, and this fear is real because if you look at today's Taiwan, people in Taiwan are less and less identifying themselves as Chinese, quote unquote, but instead overwhelmingly identifying themselves as Taiwanese. Last week, as a matter of fact, February 22nd to be exact, the most authoritative opinion poll in Taiwan, conducted by the National Chengchi University, published a new poll based upon interviews with 16,000 adults, 20 years and older. According to this poll, 61.7%, close to 2/3 of people identify themselves as pure Taiwanese. 32 of them identify themselves both as Chinese and Taiwanese, or you might say Chinese Taiwanese. In the same way, Dwight Eisenhower would identify himself as German American. But only 2.4% of this polled would identify themselves as pure Chinese. You can see the national identity is very different. So the tie is really, really remote right now. So if Quemoy and other offshore islands were taken by China, the 100-mile Strait would permanently and completely drive Taiwan away from any cultural or political identification with China, which is one of the reasons why China's response to this particular drowning incident is very peculiar and relatively careful this time over the fisherman's drowning incident. It's a loud and visceral protest from foreign ministry. There's some kind of veiled threat as well. But as the Time magazine puts it, China isn't blowing up over the deaths of fishermen that Taiwanese forces chased away, and unquote. That's precisely because of China's ambivalence about this Quemoy Island. Number one, I mean, it's not owned by China. They want to take it. Number two, if you take it and then you lose the tie with the mainland China. So that's basically something that China doesn't quite know how to deal with it.
And for our last topic, last episode we discussed the PRC Foreign Minister Wang Yi's inflammatory remarks at the 2024 Munich Security Conference. But this past week, we have another Wang Yi story, his absence at the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Brazil. When asked about his absence, a PRC foreign ministry spokesperson simply stated, China attaches great importance to the role of the G20 and will send a delegation. Miles, what does this tell us about China's foreign policy that they would send a delegation in his stead?
Wang Yi's excuse for not attending the first ministerial meeting, which is foreign ministers meeting in Brazil, is just not convincing. G20 is not what China wants. What China wanted is a CCP-dominated group. Wang Yi, after Munich conference, and he went to Spain and Portugal, and then he went back to China. He sent his very unimportant deputy, who is not in real power position, to Brazil to mark China's attendance. Blinken, Lavrov, and UK Foreign Minister Cameron, everybody showed up except China in the major countries' representation in there. China is uncomfortable with the G20 because countries, particularly countries within the BRICS, like South Africa, like India, and Brazil now, they are actually play a very leading role in G20. In 2022, the host country was South Africa. Xi Jinping didn't feel very comfortable because his buddy, Vladimir Putin, was not invited. Putin was, by that time, has been wanted by the International Criminal Court. In India last year, hosted the G20. Xi Jinping didn't even bother to go, so he's no-show. Brazil this year hosting this, and the Chinese government basically had the same kind of attitude. China is not happy that its gangster body, Putin, as I said, wanted by ICC, was not invited to G20 South Africa and India last year. It's hard to see that G20 Brazil will see Putin there too this year. As a result, and Putin and Xi Jinping probably will take a uniform step and to skip a G20, just like he skipped G20 last year in India. So it's very hard for Wang Yi to go there to explain all this. By the way, when talking about the Russia and China, China is the only country willing to provide diplomatic immunity and a political stage for Putin to shine. Give you one example. In May of last year, China hosted this thing called the China Central Asia Summit, which is a copycat of the U.S.'s 2015 C5+1 summit in Washington, D.C. Putin was allowed to go to China, and he used that stage provided by China to meet many countries' leaders in safe haven in Xi'an, China, provided by China, because Putin has very few countries that he could go to without being arrested by the International Criminal Court. Speaking of this, why do you think that Xi Jinping is so gung-ho about Putin's presence in all the international multilateral conferences? I think one reason really is because this ICC warrant is a great deterrence to China's Xi Jinping. Imagine this. Putin is wanted for war crime in Ukraine. If Xi Jinping invades Taiwan, Xi could be banned from international forums such as G20 as well. He could be served as an arrest warrant, just like Putin. So that's why he's very, very keen on protecting Putin as well. Now, I think there's also another reason for Wang Yi's no-show in Brazil. That's because Russia's foreign minister Lavrov showed up, and he was wrongly criticized for Russia's war in Ukraine. And China has said openly, repeatedly, that China is on Russia's side in the Ukrainian war. Wang Yi, he wanted to avoid being humiliated as Russia's ally. And instead, the best way to skip the meeting and to visit Spain and Portugal.
万事不求人，私人助理、私人顾问时代来临了。六度万事，万事相助，超强博士群不断奉献专项服务，信息、财经、健康、文娱、教育、旅游、消费、科技、美食，让您的生活品质全线升级。六度世界现在体验，请去3w.6度.world。
限时免费期间，全体注册网友免费使用付费版的高级功能如下：支持论坛搜索，免费画图。第一步，点击右上角最左边的机器人符号开始对话，像图片中红框中的那样。第二步，如图选择六度万事，我们未来将推出更多的 AI 供大家选择。然后就可以与六博士悄悄畅谈了。还支持论坛内部信息搜索哦。您还可以让六博士做你的助手，帮你绘制漂亮图片。最后可以点击添加好友进来，一起与六博士工作。一起来3w.6度.world尝试吧。